Hello and welcome to a look at Pinball Power for the Commodore 64, a game that was released by Mastertronic. As you can likely gather from the title, this is indeed a pinball game, and of course you could argue that if you acquire a game called Pinball something, expecting something else than a pinball game would likely be slightly foolish. The concept of a pinball is, of course, incredibly simple. You have two or more flippers that you use buttons to activate or to flick if you want, and your goal is to send a ball across the different tables that you can play in the real machines, or on the real machines, I should say, and score as many points by hitting various bonus loops and traps and unlocking multiple and that kind of stuff. Very simple, but also in its own way somewhat addictive. This particular title is a very bare-bone pinball game. The pinball table itself is not necessarily super exciting. It hasn't got an awful lot of things going for it, but it is sufficient to consider it a pinball game. It has all the elements you need to have. You have the ball, you have the flippers, you have various different traps, you have various different targets you can hit, and various different skill shots that you can try to perform by making sure the ball is at the right point on whatever side flipper you may be sending it away from, and hope to hit something that will trigger bonus or some description or build up score. It's very hard to come up with something new to say about pinball, so let's just go straight to the technical side of things. From a graphical point of view, I think this is surprisingly decent looking. The graphical representation of the pinball table is very good, especially when you consider this is a cheap range game. And while it doesn't do an awful lot of flashy stuff, it fulfills the illusion of what a pinball table could look like. So, from a graphical point of view, I'm actually quite happy. The smoothness of the ball definitely helps a lot to sell the illusion of a pinball game, and yeah, no complaints there. There's no music, so yeah, well, that's quite quickly passed over. But the sound effects, they are sufficient. What can I say? They are not boring, but they are perhaps not as satisfying as they could be. And the ball making that trailing sound thing may be something that someone could find slightly annoying. I wouldn't necessarily say that I found it annoying, but I didn't find it particularly welcome either. But again, it is entirely sufficient for a pinball game of whatever type it might be. The controls. You use the F7 key to launch the ball, and you use the cursor keys to right cursor key to flip the right flipper, and then you use the Commodore key to flip the left flipper, and everything works as it should. Nothing overly spacey in that regard. Pinball games, of course, have been made quite elaborate, both in computer versions and the physical tables. And as I've mentioned in coverage of other pinball games, I have never been one that's been particularly enamored by physical pinball games. I usually end up playing them once or twice and then don't touch them for 15 years, which has more or less been the case. But I do enjoy a good pinball game from time to time. And while this particular title is entirely sufficient for that purpose, I have played far too much pinball dreams and pinball fantasies on the Amiga. And I'm not going to compare the Commodore 64 to the Amiga. There is 8 bits of difference, which are quite significant. And of course, other technical differences. But having played those particularly excellent games specifically, makes it a bit hard to look at less flashy, less energetic, less exciting pinball games with an unusual eye, I have to admit. Something, of course, to consider is the fact that this game would have cost £1.99. And for that price, you can only expect so much. And in that regard, I would say that the game surpasses any expectations you may have. Obviously, there's no music. You could probably have some sort of hip soundtrack of some description. But I wouldn't say the game suffers from not having one such. The main thing this game suffers from is, of course, lack of high score saving, because this was a tape game. Multiple player is not necessarily a big thing, but it sort of requires that you have someone sitting next to you, and the 2 of you, or 3 of you, or 10 of you, or whatever it might be, could take turns on trying to beat each other's high scores. And that would possibly be the more exciting potential aspect out of this particular title. It's not particularly generous with scoring, which is maybe insignificant, but pinball games by and large will like to spit out big point numbers, and you could argue in that regard this could be potentially a bit disappointing. All in all though, I mean, for £1.99, this is an entirely serviceable and playable pinball game, even though it definitely lacks some excitement. On that note, thanks for watching, take care, see you next time, bye bye for now.